We're seeing now HR and procurement, payroll functions really coming together and treating contingent and cross-border workforce as genuine extended workforce. AI is absolutely transforming our lives. People love AI because it follows rules, but humans wrote those rules. And I think that captures it really perfectly.
Hello and welcome back to the Payroll podcast. Now, the world of work has changed and it's going to change even more over the next 5 years. More of the world's workforce will be contingent, cross-border and platform-based, probably more than the full-time in-office employees we've become so used to. And if payroll isn't ready, then it needs to be, because if compliance breaks, business breaks. And today's episode is all about why contingent workforce payroll is becoming the biggest compliance challenge of our time. Now, if it's the first time you've come to this show, welcome. Please do remember to click subscribe or follow or whatever you get your favorite podcast or audio content. And if you're on YouTube, please do give us a like and leave us a review and a comment as well. But most importantly, please, if you can, share this episode with your colleagues and friends so that together we can really raise the profile of payroll worldwide. If you're not familiar with myself, my name is Nick Day. I'm the CEO at JGA Recruitment. We're a specialist payroll recruitment company. And today, as I mentioned, we're going to be diving into one of the fastest growing and least understood areas of modern payroll, the global contingent workforce. And to do that, I'm joined by Anita Milasinovic, who is head of contingent workforce compliance and practices at Papaya Global and a leading voice at Papaya, where she helps multinational organizations navigate one of payroll's most complex frontiers: onboarding, managing, paying, and staying compliant with a blended workforce of contractors, gig workers, cross-border talent, contingent specialists, and more, I'm sure. So with global expansion accelerating for many of you listeners, with regulatory landscape shifting by the month and AI transforming the way that we even think about how we process payroll, how we collaborate, how we do everything in today's business landscape, I think this conversation is quite timely. So Anita, welcome to the Payroll podcast. How are you feeling?
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. I'm really feeling really good. Thank you.
I'm super excited. This is, as I said, an emerging thing that we need to start talking about. Compliance is right at the forefront of payroll. It's not going to change. It's getting more and more complex as we go global. Before we jump into all of the contingent workforce of today, I'm going to ask you a question I ask all of my guests, which is, what does the word payroll mean to you?
We all work to get paid, right? And payroll is really how we turn that work into payment. And we have to make sure that it's accurate, that it's timely, and that is really the foundation of trust in any type of workforce.
Yeah, I fully agree. Trust is absolutely critical. And we're in an era now of globalization. We're seeing a lot of the people that listen to this show, maybe a year ago, they had just domestic payrolls. Now they've got payrolls in multiple countries. And of course, the nature of the way that we employ our staff is also shifting. I mentioned the gig economy. We've got contractors and all types of different types of, I guess, contingent and cross-border work that's taking place. So from your perspective, what do you think is driving that shift? And how is it changing the way organizations think about workforce strategy and flexibility?
So what we have been seeing over the past years really is that contingent and cross-border work it has been growing really steadily for years now. And the drivers like global skills and skill shortages and digitalization and obviously the need for flexible workforce, it has been there for a really long time. And what is changing now, what we are noticing, is how organizations are actually managing it. We're seeing now HR and procurement and payroll functions really coming together and treating contingent and cross-border workforce as genuine extended workforce and not as a kind of hot potato separate bucket of spend. So it's not so much about explosive growth of contingent workforce, but it's more about companies becoming mature and in the way they manage it, and companies realizing that for them, in order to stay agile and to stay competitive, they really need a holistic workforce strategy that includes every type of worker, permanent, contingent, cross-border, and now they are finally trying to manage that contingent workforce with the same level of structure and the compliance as the internal full-time employee population.
That makes sense. You mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned talent shortage. You mentioned costs and obviously trying to improve our profits within an organization. But is it driven more by the talent shortage that the workforce are changing, or is it driven more by that cost optimization? Everyone's got an eye on the bottom line.
It's a combination. One does absolutely not exclude the other.
Okay, interesting. And do you think the mindset of global organizations has changed since the pandemic, or even since 2020? Because I've seen a massive shift.
Absolutely, because obviously since COVID and since we kind of opened ourselves to the remote work, companies are massively tapping cross borders to get the best talent, and this is where contingent labor is making a massive impact.
So I think this is why payroll people need to be prepared, because even if you haven't got those kind of multidisciplinary workforces now, that could change very quickly. And obviously we don't often have a choice in payroll whether when that change takes place. It's dictated beyond our control, either by talent or by C-suite. But we've suddenly got to be prepared then for the compliance elements that come with it, being able to make sure that we're paying people accurately and on time and compliantly in multiple countries. So when organizations do start to expand their contingent workforce globally, there are many, I've seen this, companies that really start to struggle to maintain that consistency when it comes to onboarding, when it comes to preparing their payroll data, when it comes to payments and compliance. Are there any kind of key elements that can really help them maintain a really effective infrastructure for managing that kind of complexity at scale?
Yeah, it is for me. It is still really amazing how many companies are still trying to manage their global contingent workforce through spreadsheets and ad hoc processes, and that works well, right? Don't get me wrong, that works well when you have a handful of people and maybe one or two countries, but not when you're operating at scale. And if you want to do this globally, there are indeed a couple of important building blocks that you need to consider. You need a proper infrastructure, and you obviously need integrated systems. Because once you're dealing with multiple countries and different teams, multiple teams, every manual step actually creates room for error. And it's not, the errors don't happen because people don't care. But it's really that without a structure, it's rather impossible to keep everything aligned. And in my view, that structure really starts with clear definitions, knowing and understanding what each engagement model means and when it is allowed and what rules around it apply. And we see a lot of confusion in practice simply because these definitions are not aligned internally, or they just don't exist. The other day, I heard clients having discussions about contractors, and when we started digging deeper, they were actually referring to fixed-term contract employees, which is a whole different cookie than an independent contractor. So it's really those blurred definitions that create risk. But once you have that clarity and you have your definitions, this is when you can start building standardization and you can start building your technology and a consistent way to bring people in to onboard them, to manage them, to pay them, and eventually, obviously, offboard them, regardless of engagement type or location. And throughout all of that, obviously, compliance is the key. Compliance needs to be built into all those steps, into all those building blocks. It's not added as a kind of one-off checklist at the beginning or as an afterthought at the end of the cycle, but embedded throughout the processes and throughout the entire life cycle of the worker engagement. And last, but certainly not least, you need a reliable way to pay people, because at the end of the day, like we said at the beginning, people work in order to get paid, and those payments need to be accurate and they need to be timely. They need to be in the right currency, compliant, and obviously transparent for your finance teams. And I think having those blocks in place is what really allows companies to scale their extended workforce safely and controlled.
It's interesting because we're hearing similar kind of response when we have the conversation around AI, right? The more complex and the businesses become, and even legislation becomes, actually, the more consistency we need to have across the board. There's no point implementing AI, for example, if your data isn't ready, because it's only going to be as powerful and as effective as the data that it's working through. And you started your response with the idea of a spreadsheet. I think every payroll vendor on the planet is trying to eliminate that manual spreadsheet kind of process, because that's where the error often exists, when in a payroll process, in a compliant process, in an onboarding process. So what I'm really interested to know is, what mistakes do companies repeatedly make during global expansion? Is, when they're using spreadsheets being one, is there something else you consistently see when people are trying to, I don't know, if they're relying on manual things and they haven't perhaps got that consistency nailed down yet? What are the most common things that you see?
Those are indeed the common mistakes we see, because sometimes companies tend to perhaps underestimate the importance and the complexity of doing this on a global scale, and then assuming that they're using spreadsheets and shared inboxes will kind of get them to the place they need to be, but that does not come without risk, and it's also very kind of labor intense because there's no integration, there is no kind of one system supporting the entire framework. You often have disjointed systems where you need 5 logins potentially and six different websites in order to manage a handful of workers. So I think that's kind of the most common mistake we're seeing with companies.
I think that consistency thing is key as well. You mentioned earlier about the difference between FTC and a contractor, of course. And of course, this has a different impact on payroll, because if it's FTC, they're going to be on the company's payroll, but probably they need to process it differently. And if it's a contractor, it may actually go to accounts first. It may go to invoicing. It's a whole different process. But if that communication is inconsistent, this is where the errors can start to pop in. So it's really important. I talk about this a lot, that payroll is collaborating with HR, that's collaborating with finance, it's collaborating with the internal talent acquisition team while onboarding, because when you have that collaboration, that's when you can start to find that consistency. And we know that compliance, it doesn't just touch payroll, it touches every part of an organization, from finance to procurement to talent to HR. Because it's so, I guess, entwined, what are some of the biggest concerns you hear from all those kind of different stakeholders? I know payroll obviously is one, but there are many here. And how can companies start to align them around a kind of unified compliance strategy that still supports speed and agility and still supports that payroll process, but actually is a little bit more collaborative?
Yeah, and you are quite right. There are different stakeholders will always come with different pain points, and they will look at compliance through different lens. As you mentioned, finance will be worried about cost leakage, procurement about contract structures, HR about worker experience, legal about regulatory. So they will all they all come from different risk angles and pain points. But the way to align them is not by creating 20 different policies or having each of those departments interpreting compliance in their own way. This is where consistency again is the key. You need to create one shared compliance framework that applies across the entire organization, and each team, each unit will still play its part within that structure, but everyone works under the same umbrella framework. And this is when then compliance kind of stops being a blocker. And then you see the speed and consistency really starting to improve, because people stop reinventing the wheel.
And there's an opportunity, I think, here for payroll professionals to become more visible. Something we talk about a lot in the payroll industry is they're often very invisible. They want to be more strategic. 75% of payroll people feel underutilized strategically. I think this is an opportunity where they can raise their heads above the parapet and speak to other functions, other stakeholders, and really maybe take the lead on that consistency framework that you're talking about to make sure that the experience is right. Are there any kind of compliance risks that are underestimated, that would perhaps be overlooked? And from your perspective, you see it quite regularly and think, this is often a point that people overlook or people underestimate, and there are some simple fixes here.
As we mentioned, compliance is really the key and is piece of every step and every process within an organization. So whether you are running the payroll, or you are you're making the actual payments on the finance sides, whether you are part of the legal team or HR team. Compliance is a part of all of those departments and part of all the processes that follow. And where we see that companies and clients tend to underestimate is the nature of the work. I often like to ask our clients, what's the percentage of your workforce? It's contingent. Yeah. And many of them will know the number or at least an approximate kind of percentage. But when I ask them the question, okay, and from that percentage of contingent workforce, how many of them are temporary employees or labor leasing employees, and how many independent contractors? And this is where I will get usually, I'm really not sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is where the risk starts.
I can see that. And we've seen, even at JJ Recruitment here, and our contract division as an example for contractors, it's grown fourfold in the last year. So we've seen a massive shift towards that kind of interim resource, because maybe that's due to cost, maybe it's down to talent shortage, plugging gaps, not needing it full time. But we've seen some workforce dynamics and recruitment dynamics shift. I'm interested though, from a CFO perspective, what's keeping them up at night? Is it the risk of an employee raising a legal issue because something is wrong? Or is it more along the line of, I want to get this right because payroll is the most important thing. I want to make sure the contractors in our workforce are paid accurately and on time, and I want to get that bit right. Is it something else completely? There must be something within this process that, or maybe keeps you up at night. I don't know. What's the kind of the big thing there? You go, we get this bit right, we're going to be okay.
No, what keeps me up at night is making the clients aware where the risk is and how to manage that risk, right? CFOs, as we mentioned, what keeps them up at night is indeed the cost leakage, risk of fines, penalties for worker misclassification. So from financial perspective, it is really about having transparency, the visibility into your cost, and full transparency on that cost, that there's no hidden cost, for example, from suppliers, or to understand how the rate benchmarking works across different countries for different roles. So that would be the main concern from a financial perspective.
So there's an element there that I've talked about a few times in some of the talks. I think is, again, quite exciting for payroll professionals, because payroll has sometimes and very often the cleanest data in any workforce. Actually, payroll people often have the opportunity to see where there may be a pay disparity, maybe there may be a pay equity gap in a workforce. They may say, actually, you've hired someone in this country, but it's out of sync with all the other regions, and you want to kind of be proactive to tackle that before there is a legal claim. And I think payroll sometimes we're head down and we're processing and invisible, and we're missing the opportunities to raise those kind of and identify those potential compliant risks. So I'd be interested in what your day-to-day from your position. Obviously, you're head of contingent workforce compliance and practice at Papaya. Tell me a little bit about your day-to-day, your involvement, the things that you would be working on with clients, and tell us a little bit more about your role.
My role is more of an advisory role, and I kind of help clients understand the different engagement models, the different ways to engage cross-border talent, global talent in a compliant way, and many of our clients are global enterprise, and operate in many countries, and it's really often very hard to navigate through the kind of the forest of all the legislations changing continuously. And in our industry, you will know this, the laws are changing continuously, labor laws. And for our clients, this is showing as a big challenge, because they do want to get it right. They do want the talent, but they also want to understand how can they engage this talent in a correct and compliant way in those countries. And this is what my role entails.
I'm actually really thankful for people like yourself in role, Anita, because it's for people like yourself that have really helped open up the the opportunities for talent to be recruited in more than one place. I mean, when I started in recruitment, we used to search for talent within a postcode. If they were outside of a certain, mile limit, we knew it would be unfeasible for them to get to the office. But actually now, we're recruiting talent for organizations all over the world. And you might have a project in the UK, but you could recruit that talent in a country, thousands of miles away. And that's really opened up the talent market, which is needed to happen because there is a talent shortage. Even globally, you have to look further now to find the right talent. Payroll in itself has become much more niche and is much more specialist in certain areas. And sometimes that talent isn't on your doorstep. So it's thanks to these sort of compliant solutions now that's opened up the talent landscape for recruiters like me. So I'm very thankful. I touched upon automation and AI a little bit earlier on in the show, but we're seeing AI and automation and analytics, which is a really big part of a payroll strategic role these days, really start to reshape how payroll leaders manage global workforces and how we can use those kind of analytics and insights to drive organizational change. How do you see some of those those sort of technologies transforming things like decision-making, cost control, and of course the employee experience, which is really, really important for contingent workers?
Yeah, AI is absolutely transforming our lives, all of our lives, and it's Sinterklaas season here in the Netherlands. I'm not sure if you know that, but it's like a holiday season where we buy presents for our loved ones, and every gift has to come with a rhyming poem. And I used to really spend evenings and evenings trying to be poetic and trying to find words, that rhyme with chocolate and marzipan and now, thanks to AI, I'm basically a poet in minutes. And it's a silly example, obviously, but it really shows how AI makes our lives easier. And that's exactly how I see it in our work as well. I recently heard someone say people love AI because it follows rules, but humans wrote those rules. And I think that captures it really perfectly. AI brings incredible speed and incredible consistency, and we are already also using it in Papaya in areas like worker classification and onboarding documents validations and so on. And it really gives you the edges of the puzzle, the structure and the clarity and the efficiency. But I still feel the middle of that puzzle belongs to human expertise. From a contingent workforce perspective, if you look at contingent workforce compliance, it is so multidimensional. For example, co-employment risk, that there is no AI model today, to my knowledge, that can read a contract, that can interpret supervision and control, that can check worker history and understand local rules and regulations well enough to make that judgment call on its own.
Yeah.
And that still requires experience and it requires context and subject matter expertise. So whilst AI takes away that repetitive and those transactional parts, but in my view, it's humans that still bring the nuance and the judgment and the accountability.
Yeah, I agree. It's that ability to contextualize what it brings back to you. And I guess this is why it's really, again, exciting for payroll people, because we're moving into an era now where there is real-time workforce intelligence. And it's up to the payroll people to kind of interpret the insights, the trends that are coming back through that data and say, hey, I've spotted something here. Take a look at it. This might make a difference to client A, or maybe there's a turnover problem or a potential burnout risk or whatever it might be. You can look at benefits utilization, absences, presenteeism, whatever it is within your data. And you can use that data in real time now, thanks to AI, and really feed that back to the C-suite and say, hey, I've spotted something. This is something that payroll couldn't do before. So it's really I think this is going to be the kind of the part of the puzzle, as you put earlier, that's going to help really raise the strategic profile of payroll. If we're able to really sort of extract those critical insights from real-time workforce intelligence. Looking ahead, we are looking at blended workforces, I think, in the future. What role do you see payroll leaders playing in sort of orchestrating those blended workforces, being full-time, part-time, contingent talent? Is there any advice you would give to them to help them prepare for this kind of new era of work that we're moving into?
I think we're seeing them already, HR and payroll, evolving beyond the traditional focus on permanent employees, and they're already starting and taking responsibility for the entire workforce, for the full-time, for the fixed-term workers, agency workers, independents, basically the full spectrum. And as I mentioned, I think that shift is happening because organizations are becoming more mature on a strategic level in how they use contingent and extended talent. And this is also where L&D comes in and plays a crucial role as well, in order, because whilst the change is happening happening furiously on a strategic level, L&D is needed to create awareness on the practical level, because most managers today don't actually know how their contingent workers are engaged, and this is where that unintentional risk starts on the work floor, and it's not from a bad intent, but really from lack of awareness. And when managers don't understand the engagement model, and they don't understand the boundaries of what they can or cannot direct in that model, or what obligations exist, or maybe even if the model simply isn't allowed in a given country. And this is where HR and L&D and payroll have a massive role, and they don't need to be experts in every jurisdiction, but they do play a huge role in creating that awareness within the organizations, and helping teams understand that different models really exist for a reason, and that each model has its own rules and benefits, as well as limitations. And I think if organizations want to operate a blended workforce safely and effectively, education, consistency, and awareness is absolutely crucial. And I say this coming from a compliance background. Compliance isn't about saying no. And I know that, some of my clients will probably laugh now and say, but Anita, you say no all the time. It's not about saying no full stop. It's really about saying not like this. It's about giving companies and their managers the tools and the knowledge to choose the right model for their scenario. And I think that's what good workforce governance is really all about.
Yeah. But I would say that, because you're absolutely right, awareness is the key for everything, right? We want to make sure that payroll help rather than hinder the process. And there's a lot to be aware of right now. There's a lot on payroll's plate. We've got to make sure we're aware of the AI innovations and how that's going to impact the process. Needs to be aware now of how the innovations are impacting the employee experience. We now need to be aware of how this impacts compliantly. You raised a really good point that, of course, in different countries, you can hire people in different ways. And we've got to be mindful of how different organizations and countries legislation works, and whether something is feasible in one place may not be somewhere else. I think it's really interesting. And we haven't really talked about fractional workers too much today, but again, we've got technology that, from my perspective, and I may be wrong, but I suspect at some point in the future we're going to see smart contracts on blockchains executing payments for fractional workers right down to the second when they finish work. We've got earned wage access and then pay on demand spreading, certainly in the UK and the US. I'm sure at some point we might see that start to come into Europe a little bit more as well. I know it's not quite as well adopted there at the moment, but there's so much coming into the market as well. There's an awful lot that we need to be aware about. So moving forward, as the industry starts to continue to innovate and change, is there anything on the horizon that perhaps payroll people can start preparing themselves for now that maybe it's not there yet, but maybe there's a technical innovation, a compliant change, anything that can help them take that first proactive step after they listen to this show and go, actually, I'm going to start making myself aware of X so that I'm helping in the future and not hindering?
It's really, the trick is to be ahead of the game. And as easy as that sounds, it's really not, because this industry is really ever changing, and not one day is the same. The regulators are tightening the knot on all types of contingent labors and engagements across the board. So it's not, you hear, you're from UK, obviously you're hearing probably a lot in the news, the IR35, the reforms in the Netherlands we're here. So, but it's actually happening globally. It's not happening just in few countries. Some countries are perhaps a little bit slower in getting there, but it is coming. And I think companies would do well if they are at least one step ahead of kind of anticipating what is going to happen, when it's going to happen, because sometimes we have clients saying, well, this country, and I'm not going to name country, but this country is fairly safe. There's not really big risks there. There aren't risks now, but when you're talking a workforce, you're typically not talking 3 months and then it's finished. You're talking about a process, a duration, and you're talking about a year and 2 and 3 and 5. And over 5 years, all of a sudden, that country does start enforcing very fiercely, but you have already exposed to that risk. So you really want to be aware of that and ahead of that, because it will happen. It will happen. We just don't know if it's going to happen today or tomorrow or over 2 years, but be ahead of when it does happen.
So I guess my last question before I open the vault then is, tell me a little bit more about how providers, EOR providers, payroll providers such as Papaya and yourselves, how you can help mitigate some of that risk. If I'm a payroll leader who is concerned about some of these challenges, I am concerned about how I manage compliance for what is becoming an increasingly blended global workforce, and I'm looking for a solution provider in this space. What are some of the things that the providers like yourselves can offer these leaders to help them mitigate some of that risk?
So we really always position ourselves as a partner to our clients rather than a service provider. And what I always like to say, we don't mind saying no to clients. Again, it's not no full stop, but it's no, you can't do it like this, but let's see how you can do it. What is the possible alternative to do this? And we've really tried to understand the client's pain points and the way their kind of their existing workforce is structured, the way they operate, in order to really understand what works well for this client, but still within the borders of what is compliant in any given country that they are interested in. So I think it's really the combination of that advisory role, what is compliant, but also of being kind of the strict watcher and saying, well, no, what you're doing there is not okay. Reconsider that, and kind of giving them also the path forward and how to restructure it or how to changes to implement in order to make them compliant, to keep their talent, but in a way that does not expose the client to risk.
Which is great. I think we've come around 360. It's still back down to that collaboration and consistency and awareness. Yeah, those 3 things are absolutely critically important if you want to get ahead. Listen, let's open the payroll vault. So 3 short, sharp questions. The first question I want to ask you is, what's one piece of advice you would give to a payroll leader who wants to make their first global hire today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose make sure you have a partner, local partner who can guide you through the forest of the regulations and the rules and the requirements, to make sure that you don't miss a step or you don't make a mistake. So I would say get a trusted partner that can support you on that journey.
Perfect. What's one thing you know now about contingent workforce compliance that you wish you'd known when you started your career?
When I started my career, and this is a long time ago, it was kind of like wild, wild west at the time, and everything was possible and everything was allowed. I mean, it wasn't strictly allowed. The laws obviously always existed, but it wasn't really being enforced as it is today. And a lot of things were still possible. And when the laws did start to tighten and the legislator did start to enforce, I remember the massive panic with clients. For example, the law changed in the Netherlands around enforcing independent contractor engagement, misclassification. And clients just massively stopped using independent contractors. And at that point, it was such a panic in the whole country. And I think it's really, if I knew then that, okay, let's press pause. Let's put a foot on the ball and let's just see what is actually going on here. Let's review how you are engaging this talent currently, because there might not be reason for panic. And I think I think that would probably be a kind of if I could look in the future back then, to understand that there's no need to worry, there's no need to kind of make any rash decisions or cause panic, because we got this. We know we know what we're doing. We know that the laws have always existed, and we know how proper engagements need to look like. The fact that it's being enforced is not really that big of a deal then, when that you are doing everything correctly.
We always have 2020 vision with hindsight. We had a similar thing here with R35 when it was first announced, and people were just hemorrhaging contractors and getting rid of them all. And, there's that panic, and you realize that everyone's panicking at the same time. So it was almost like just, take a pause and realize, it's okay, we'll take a patient approach. But as you can say, it's very easy with hindsight. My last question is there any particular book, resource, quote, mentor, anything like that that's inspired your approach to global workforce transformation?
Oh, that's a good one. I when I started in this industry again 18, 19 years ago, I had two mentors who really kind of taught me all the ins and outs about this. About this world, and I think that they've really also created kind of passion in me for cross-border work, for kind of enabling. And back then, 20 years ago, it wasn't as kind of hype and as common as it is today. But they really did kind of build in this passion for me we're actually enabling workers from Spain to go work on top of the Kathmandu. I'm saying something now, and we are making that happen. And I think this is when I realized that the kind of the freedom and the power that we are actually causing with what we do is really what kind of what always got stuck with me for all these years, and why I'm still in this industry and still within so much pleasure and joy doing what I do today.
Well, I think it's great. I'm very thankful because for me, you've unlocked a hidden door to talent that is now global, and that was always a really big restriction on companies that wanted to scale, companies that wanted to grow, who wanted the best talent within their budget. And I think that due to the work that people like yourself are doing, it's helped enable those companies to scale quicker, to get that great talent in, and also to really empower workforces worldwide rather than particular locations. I think that's really, really exciting. So I've really enjoyed the conversation today. For people that want to find out more, please do go to the links I put in the show notes, which will link you to the papayaglobal.com. There's a link there on global workforce AI and embedded AI, which is really worth having a look at. I'll put a link in the show notes. And there's also a whole link as well, which focuses on compliance automation and data validation. So it's a really interesting couple of links. I suggest everyone that's listening to this who wants to find out more, definitely go and check it out. Just click on the show notes and you can be taken straight through. I'll also share Anita's LinkedIn profile if you want to find out more. But I want to say one more huge thank you to Anita Milasinovic for joining me today on the Payroll podcast to talk about a very complex area, and that is around workforce compliance. If we didn't think payroll could be any more complex, we've just thrown something else into the mix for people to be aware of. But without anyone panicking at this moment, I think this is another opportunity for payroll people to really raise their strategic profile, get involved, collaborate, raise your awareness, as Anita said during the course of today's episode. Go and speak to those other stakeholders and get ahead of this, because this will really help raise the importance of payroll, and most importantly, make sure that you are paying people effectively on time, most importantly, compliantly. And blended workforces is a complex subject area. So hopefully today's episode has helped you navigate that a little bit more easily than perhaps you were going to before. So Anita, thank you ever so much for joining me today on the Payroll Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Nick.